Hi everyone, if you like what I do, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and consider checking out my Patreon. Enjoy the video. Once he had been known as the unknown saviour of a faraway Earth realm, but now, lost between realities and forgotten by time, he endlessly fights for his life, desperately clinging on to what little he had left of his old existence. Scraps of memory, a name, that which was not stripped from him by the tormenting dreamlands and eternal arena. In time though, he would prove himself to unseen watchers and be granted the chance at life anew. Only as cruel as fate usually was, his destiny would be forever defined only by blood and loss and sorrow. Gods had begun. Humanity had all players deep and challenging, different is less likely to get me horribly 0400 hours. Slipgate complex. The moment when everything changed. Most of the Slipgate Marines were dead already. Others had been partially transformed into cybernetic abominations, and the rest, well, they had already run. The nightmares before them, overwhelming years of military training. Still, there was a mission to be completed. Kill the entity codenamed Quake, close the portals, then maybe the hell pouring through the Slipgate would stop. The lone marine known only as Ranger would carve through the maddening visages, driven only by the thought of stopping this evil, if not for humanity as a whole, then for his family, who he would, God willing, return to. It was a dream that never left his mind, and yet every day slipped further and further out of reach. Ranger would relentlessly search for twisted realities, for a way to stop for being driving all of this, and would eventually unite 4 mystical rooms, so he may travel to the cathedral of the All-Mother, the festering pit of Quake itself, Shub-Niggurath, and end her machinations once and for all. His mission finally complete, Ranger expected to be whisked back to his own world, recalled by the Slipgate technicians, surely observing his progress, but it was never to be. The complex, the barracks, everything to do with the project had surely been reduced to rubble and covered up by now. His name listed alongside those who had fallen during the incident. In the face of this inevitability though, Ranger had refused to give up hope. He would take the orb that he had used to slay Quake, and continue fighting until he either found himself back home or met his end. Even though his own kind had abandoned him for lost, he was still being watched by a power that was invested in his survival. For this tenacious human from a backwater dimension may just have proved himself worthy to participate in the Arena Eternal, an opportunity that may lead to something much more. From that point onwards, life only went from bad to worse for Ranger as every waking second became a battle for survival, as he was faced with an array of varied opponents, unlike any he had faced before. The All-Mother's young were fierce. Those mechanical Strogg were brutal, but nothing compared to these new challenges. They were fast, agile and calculating. More than a match for him, but still they lacked something. They seemed to relish the fight, not caring if they live or died. But Ranger had a family to live for. They needed him, and so he went on fighting, playing the games that were handed down by the arena masters. Time came to mean nothing to him, as existence itself blurred into a single fever dream of blood and bullets. At long last, memory began to fail Ranger, as the arena became all that he had ever known. First it was his own name, then went the mundane details of his life, but soon enough the names of his children fell away, leaving only initials, echoes of what had been, and snippets of emotion. He would cling on to the last remnants of the past, like they were life itself, the name of his wife and the dream of returning to her, but eventually these too would be torn away from him, and at last his trial would be complete. The Bethians had set up the arena after the emergence of the Slayer as a counterpart to the one on Sentinel Prime. Only here they would test the most worthy from across the multiverse, seeking others who matched the Slayer in strength and ferocity to fight in their war against Hell. Ultimately, the Bethians' experiment would prove a failure when their city was reduced to ruins, except for a single subject. When he was pulled from the arena, Ranger was a broken man, wiped of any and all humanity, a clean slate for the Argenta to control how they might. But even though his memories were gone, something lived on within him, a human trait that would drive him to actions none could have anticipated. Bestowing upon him the name Valen, the Argenta trained him in the ways of the Night Sentinels. They made no qualms about him being different from the others, going on to forge a set of custom Praetor armor as they had for other Sentinels not originally of Argent Danur. He was a warrior, just as his brothers in arms, and this was the only thing they either saw or cared for. Unlike his counterpart who cared only for ripping and tearing, Valen chose to rise through the ranks of the Argenta, and during this time came to marry a Danurian who bore him a son. Somehow across the universe, and in a different dimension, a form of the dream he had longed for in the arena had come to pass. It was a tragic thing then, that it was never about to last. In time, Valen would rise to become the commander of the Knight Sentinels and lead the legions in glorious battle against the forces of hell, legions that would include his son. With Commander Valen and the Doomslayer holding the line, there was little the demonic hordes could do to gain any ground, but as there always was, in any war, there were casualties, and on one fateful day, it was reported that among the dead was Valen's own son. It was the Argenta way to herald their fallen heroes, rejoicing family members who had given their lives in glorious battle. Valen was not of the Argenta though, and all the humanity that had been stripped from him in the arena returned all at once. He would not rejoice for his fallen son. He would grieve, and he would go on grieving for everything that had ever happened to him, everything that he had forgotten until he could take it no more. He was not about to allow this, and decreed that he would do anything to bring his son back, no matter the cost. By now, unbeknown to the Sentinels, the Order of the Deeg, the Argenta's high priests, had fallen to the Dark Lord's influence, and saw Valen's torment as a thing they could exploit to open the path for Hell's victory over Argent Danur. Deeg Grav, leader of the priests, offered to resurrect Valen's son in return for him opening the way to the Wraiths, mythical creatures of Danur whose power could grant the demons enough strength to fell all before them. Overcome by grief and plagued with visions of his son's endless torture, he agreed and betrayed everything he believed he had ever known. Ironically though, Valen's visions had been of a future his actions would eventually lead to, as Grav would indeed resurrect his son as promised, just not in the way that had been expected. The Hell Priests would take the heart of Valen's fallen son and pervert his form into a mighty titan that would become known as the Icon of Sin, fulfilling Valen's vision of his son's eternal torment. After one last failed attempt by the Knight Sentinels to strike back at Hell, Valen was condemned as the betrayer of Argent Danur, but consumed by guilt and still grieving for the fate he had brought upon his son, he would exile himself in the unholy realm, choosing a life of forsaken solitude as penance for his actions. Despite not hearing from him for many centuries, however, Valen's role was not over. Having had many lifetimes to consider his past and maybe even remember some of his life as Ranger, he would at last be approached by the Slayer of Doom, himself now working outside of the Argenta's will, a kindred spirit almost, of another dimension but still ultimately human, with all of their drives and desires. In a way, the Slayer understood why Valen had done what he had, and did not think ill of him for it. For that reason, it was the Slayer who was entrusted with the task of finally putting his son to rest. Although the action would unleash the uncontrolled icon of sin upon Earth, it was something the Slayer did without hesitation, at last ending the son's torment, and finally bringing Valen, that lost Slipgate Marine from another reality, some modicum of peace. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, then please consider liking the video, subscribing and sharing it with your friends. If you want to support the channel even more, then head over to Patreon, become a channel member, or buy some merch. Links are all down in the description. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.